Okay, in this video I want to talk a little bit about how to set Figma up to work on print projects and then how to work with grids in it. So before I say that, the very first thing I want to say is that Figma is really not a program that's meant to work on print projects. And the way that we're going to work with it in this video is really just to be able to use it as a substitute and get through the projects. And I wouldn't recommend doing this for actually printing something out. So with that being said, the reason that's the case is because of how resolution works, both for screens and for print. So screens by default are typically set up to have 72 pixels per inch. That's what this PPI is. And printers actually print 300 dots per inch. So we can kind of estimate pixels and dots to be a relevant unit or a relative unit to each other. And what that means is that like 12 pixels on a screen looks almost 4 times smaller if you were to print it out at a resolution of 300 dots per inch. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into just how to get started with this. The very first thing I'm going to do in Figma is grab a frame, which is basically a container. If I grab that tool, I have this tabloid layout, and I'm going to select that because I'm going to go ahead and rotate it. Let's say I want to create a spread of pages at let's say 8 inches wide by 10 inches tall. And that's the size we're going to do because this actually lets us print 2 pages side by side on an 11 by 17 piece of paper, which is what this default is, because that means that we are 16 inches wide, so 8 times 2, by 10 inches tall. So you can see that 16 by 10 fits within 11 by 17. Okay, so we want to keep this at 11 by 17 because when we export this, we want to be able to tell the printer to fill up the whole 11 by 17 page with it. So we have to do a few things in order to kind of work on our size without shrinking that total canvas. The first thing to do is, if you don't have these rulers around the edge of your screen, is to go to View, make sure Rulers is turned on. While you're in here, go ahead and make sure that in Preferences, you have Snap to Pixel Grid turned on as well, because that's going to make a step later easier. Okay, so essentially to get down to this 16 by 10, because this is basically 17 by 11 right now, we need to shave off 1 inch from the top and the sides of this. So this is where that pixels per inch comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a rectangle to help me out. And if I just place this on the page somewhere, we know that 1 inch in how Figma is operating is 72 pixels. And I can type that in over here in the Properties panel. So if I place this here, we know that now this distance from here to here is 16 inches. So we actually need this to be half that size so that we have a guide for kind of cutting ½ inch off all around. We can actually do that math right in within Figma itself if you don't want to do it in your head. So I'm going to put / and then 2 to say 72 divided by 2. Gives us 36.5 pixels. Okay, so now if I align that right on the edge of my page, where this ends is ½ inch. So I'm going to hover over my ruler over here on the left, click and drag out, and I'm going to drop that ruler right on the edge of this, and that is ½ inch in from the left. And move this over here and do the same thing on the right. Then I can rotate this, do the same thing up top, Let's make sure that's lined up. And the same thing at the bottom. Okay, pretty cool. So now the area inside here is 16 inches wide by 10 inches tall. That's great. So now we want to set up this 8 by 10 page space. So we know that this is 16 by 10. So half of this width is 8 inches. So we can again come over here to our width. I'm going to go ahead and divide that by 2. And then I'm going to drop a ruler or a guide right there on the edge. So now these are our facing pages of a spread. So we're getting pretty close. Now, to work with grids in Figma, we have to work with nested frames. So like we created a frame for our whole spread here. We're going to go ahead and grab the frame tool again, and we're going to make a frame within our page. You can see over here in the layers panel, this is nested within here. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this left page grid so that you can see what we're looking at. So we still need to give this some margin because we don't want that grid to run right up to the edge of the page. You could do some more math and measuring to say basically like what you wanted your margins on the page to be. So for example, if we wanted a 1/4 inch from the edge of the page, we could go ahead and draw a rectangle there. We know that 72 pixels is 1 inch. So a 1/4 inch, for example, would be 72 divided by 4. We could run that right up to there. And then usually your inside margin, you want it to be a little more. You want it to be like about double. So let's say that we want this to be a 1/2 inch again over here, which we know is 36. Which this is. So you could just place this here. You could grab yourself some more rules if you wanted to do it that way. And then you do the same at the top. In fact, let's do that just really quick. Let's pretend that this is the measurement we want. And then maybe we want it to be like approximately double that down at the bottom. Okay, so those are the margins within our page. So I have my frame set up to be aligned to those margins. And this is where the stuff on my page is actually going to go because it's all going to go in the margins. To give myself a grid, what I do is I have the frame selected. And then I come over here into my properties where it says layout grid. If I click on that or I hit plus, you see we get a default 10 pixel grid. If I select the icon there, I can actually change this to a different type of grid. So for a layout, for example, let's say we want this to be, let's start with a 6-column grid. So this by default is 5. You can see we get those spaces selected. I can move this up to 6, let's say. And then I could adjust the gutter space by clicking and dragging in between those columns. You want this to be enough space that you can differentiate between the items there and they don't feel cramped if they're side by side together. Let's go ahead and say something like, 16 there, for example. Okay, so now we have a 5-column grid over here on the left. You'd basically do the same thing over here on the right. You'd want the same margins and everything. And we can actually layer grids on top of each other here. Let's take a look at a type study first. So I'm going to grab some text. let's say I have figured out my text already. Let's say by default this is something like "10 pixels tall by, I don't know, 12. Let's go ahead and put some testing default text in here, just so we can test out the line height. And you can see how a baseline grid should function. Let's pretend this is our text for now. So the height of the text in here is 10 pixels, and then the height of the whole line from baseline to baseline is 12. So our baseline grid is that leading. It's not the size of the text, it's the size of the baseline to the next baseline. So if we give ourselves another grid here, we want this to be rows. And then our count, this actually needs to be automatic. We don't want a default count because we want it to run all the way from the top down. The type can be top because we want it to start at the top. And then the height needs to be our leading or a multiple or division of our leading. So for example, 12 was our leading. We can set the height to that. Oops. Jump back into here. And then we want the gutter to be the same. Okay, so now you see that we have rows of 12 pixels. And if I place my text on there and I zoom in and I match up my baselines, you'll see that they line up perfectly. And that is great because now we have this established vertical rhythm that as we get more and more text, it all lines up just swell. The other thing to think about here is how headings fit into the picture here. You actually want your headings and your body text to be in different text boxes because we need to be able to establish different line heights for those things. So for example, you may have, whoops, let me just make sure I have this selected. You may have done your type study and selected, like we did here, maybe you have 10-point copy and 12-point leading. Your headings might need to be much larger than that to create hierarchy. And sometimes they might run multiple lines depending on how long they are, right? So let's pretend this is my heading and I want this to be actually 30 points in bold. So all of a sudden our vertical rhythm is thrown off because the leading of this cannot be the same as the leading of your body copy. What it needs to be is a multiple of that. So if our body copy leading is 12, let's check 24, for example. Still too tight, our D and our G are colliding. Let's check 36, 12 times 3. That starts to look much better. So let's line this up down below, and you'll see we'll need at least one line of space in between. And sometimes it's easier to select it over here in the layers panel, or else you'll keep grabbing your frame. Okay, so that starts to look pretty good. Now you can see that we have a good vertical rhythm. If we got, say, I'm just gonna go ahead and make these even to 3 columns wide. We could run 2 columns of text on a page. We have some nice even space in between. If I want to see this without the columns, I can just hide them over here. And it looks pretty good. There's a few other things we can do to make like arranging this text a little bit easier as we're changing font sizes and typefaces and such. But it gets a little bit complex for our purposes and for Figma not really being the right tool for a print job. So the last thing I want to talk about is exporting this work. If you export something as a PDF, so I'm going to select my whole page here, add it to the export, switch from PNG to PDF. If I export this as a PDF now, it's going to look totally fine. I just need to make sure that I print it at 11 by 17. If you are adding images into here and you print them, you will probably notice that the images get blurry as this gets much larger because of that conversion from 72 pixels per inch to 300 dots per inch. What you could do is make sure your images are large enough and kind of like multiply everything by basically 4 to make sure that it's all accounted for. For the purposes of this project, I advise that you don't do that. Just export it as a PDF and go ahead and print it. Because really, if you're working on a print project, you should be doing something like this in InDesign. And we just want to make sure that you kind of like get the takeaways that you need to and aren't suffering through this to try and get that resolution in print. So export it as a PDF. Here's my page. If I needed to, I could trim off that 1/2 inch from every side, and then that would be your 16 by 10 layout spread. Okay, I hope that kind of puts some of the pieces together as far as working in Figma, grids, and then how to make those baseline grids work in Figma. Okay, I will see you next time.